What is good, everybody? Welcome back to another episode brought to you by the League FFB. Today, we are going to be doing a 2023 rookie wide receiver recap, talking about the 2023 class, how we should be evaluating them moving forward into the 2024 offseason, and which of these guys we're buying, selling, and holding for Dynasty Fantasy Football. So without wasting any more time, let's hop right into today's video, and let's talk about how these guys were valued coming into the preseason of their rookie seasons. Now, obviously, the best way to show how these guys have changed values over time is looking at where they began. So without further ado, let's pull up these rookie wide receiver preseason ADPs. And you see, these are one quarterback rookie ADPs, but this is how your wide receivers were viewed early this summer. Jaxon Smith-Njigba, he was coming off of the board as your wide receiver one in the early first round, followed by Addison, Quentin, Johnston, and Zay Flowers. That was kind of your top four wide receivers in the 2023 class. All of those guys were first round talents. Now, Jonathan Mingo came off of the board there at the 13-5. Rashee, Josh Downs, Marvin, Mims. That was kind of your, and let's include Jayden in there. That was kind of your late second round and your entire second round for these rookie wide receivers. And then you had Hyatt, who was an early third rounder in these rookie drafts earlier this summer. But what did they do once they got drafted? Well, let's talk about that. Looking at their finishes over in 2023, we did have these rookie PPR rankings and points per game. Starting at the wide receiver 4, it was Puka Nacua. He was the best rookie wide receiver, and you'll notice he wasn't on that first list that we showed you. He was averaging 17.6 fantasy points per game. Now, following next to him was a pretty significant drop-off, right? Wide receiver 4 to wide receiver 23, that was your next rookie wide receiver, but that was Addison. Now, that does seem like it's pretty accurate. He was drafted fairly highly. He was the wide receiver 2 coming off the board in drafts, and he finished as the wide receiver 2. So Addison did what he was supposed to do. Jayden, 13.6 fantasy points per game. Another one of those surprises, I think, at the wide receiver position, finishing as the wide receiver 25. Wide receiver 27, that was Rashee with 13.3 fantasy points per game. Wide receiver 30, Zay Flowers, 12.9 fantasy points per game. And then you get into wide receiver 39, Dell. Now, keep in mind, he had 15 fantasy points per game, scoring a lot of fantasy points, but he did have that season-ending injury that he suffered later in the year that did force him to miss some time, so it did hurt his overall wide receiver finish. Wide receiver 43, Josh Downs, 9.2 fantasy points per game. JSN, wide receiver 48, 8.8 fantasy points per game. And then you had Dontayvion Wicks with 8 points per game and Michael Wilson with 8.8 points per game. With all of that being said, seeing where they started and seeing where they finished, I want to talk about a couple players. I want to spotlight them. These are your top 5 rookies per KTC. And keep in mind, Keep Trade Cut is a tool that we use to kind of show us how the community values these wide receivers and these dynasty assets as a whole. It's kind of like the fantasy football stock market. We get to see how these guys are trending over time. We get to see them rise, fall, and then we get to react to however we want to. Now, looking at my first player spotlight, I want to talk about Puka Nacua. And keep in mind, Puka Nacua had a baller of a rookie wide receiver season. Now, currently being valued as the wide receiver 7 over on Keep Trade Cut. And this is a guy who was drafted in the 5th round by the Los Angeles Rams, 6'2", 205 pounds. And you see that over the course of the year, that 6th month KTC, Puka Nacua saw a pretty significant skyrocket in value. Starting there with his low at 1,595 KTC, finishing there with 6,675 KTC. This is probably one of the biggest, if not the single biggest riser. Now, Puka Nacua currently being valued as the wide receiver 7. Like I said, this is a player that I am waiting on as far as selling, buying. I just want to hold him, man. I don't want to react to this right now. Now, I will say that if you are somebody who has Puka Nacua and you fear about Matthew Stafford's future, I guess I could see that argument, and you wanting to move him for a different asset, that's fine. But let's talk about some of the assets that are being valued next to him adjacently at the wide receiver position. So you see currently a wide receiver 4, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Garrett Wilson, AJ Brown, then Puka Nacua right there in that middle piece, and Chris Olave, Tyreek Hill, and Jalen Waddle. So we see that 6,675 KTC. some of the most similar is actually AJ Brown and Garrett Wilson. I don't know how you guys feel about Puka and AJ, Puka and Garrett Wilson. To me, that's why I'm saying I would rather hold right now. I think there's an argument for Puka over Garrett Wilson at the moment. If you wanted to sell Puka and go get Garrett Wilson, I don't mind you doing that either. Or you want to go get AJ Brown, I don't mind you doing that either. But I think right now, Puka Nacua is a hold for me. I kind of want to see how he plays in these NFL playoffs, because I do think that that can impact his dynasty value moving forward as well. But I don't see a real clear reason why we should be selling Puka Nacua at this price. And I definitely don't know why we would be buying Puka Nacua at this price. But that being said, let's look at some of the value adjacent overall players. Now you see some of the players here that he is being compared to. Breece Hall, again, those two wide receivers, Sam Laporta, Chris Olave, Trevor Lawrence. Again, this is a hold for me. I don't know if I want to sell Puka for any of those assets. I also don't know if I want to buy Puka Nacua for any of those assets. So for me, Puka Nacua, great rookie season. Probably the offensive rookie of the year. That is going to be my guess for Puka Nacua. He had the best rookie wide receiver season of all time. And for me, this is a dynasty asset that I am waiting on and I am holding throughout the offseason, at least through the early parts of the offseason. Now, moving on over to the next wide receiver in my rookie spotlight, we are going to be talking about Zay Flowers for the Baltimore Ravens. And you got to keep in mind what we have here with Zay Flowers. This is a wide receiver who was drafted in the first round of the 2023 NFL draft, a player who is 23 years old, 5'9", 182 pounds, and his value has seen an increase over the last 6 months. You see earlier in the offseason being valued at 4,083 KTC. This is a player now who is being valued at 5,304 KTC, moved all the way up to that wide receiver 13. So when we look at Zay Flowers and I look at how I am valuing him, this is also another player that I think is properly valued in the community, player that I am holding at this price. I don't see any real reason to react to where the price is at right now. But let's talk about some of the players that are also being valued similarly to him. So if you feel differently about Zay Flowers, you know who you can target and who you can make adjustments for. But looking at these value adjacent wide receivers, you see Jalen Waddle, Brandon Ayuk, Nico Collins. Those are some of the wide receivers above Zay Flowers, and just below Zay Flowers, we have DJ Moore, Devontae Smith, and Jordan Addison. So as I look at this, I think a year 2 for Zay Flowers is going to be even better than what we saw year 1. The offense has looked great. Todd Monken has looked great as the offensive coordinator here. And I think that there is a real argument for taking Zay Flowers over a guy like Nico Collins. That's definitely something that I am doing. I think there's an argument for Zay Flowers over a DJ Moore if you think that the Chicago Bears could potentially go and get a Marvin Harrison. I think there's an argument for Zay Flowers over Devontae Smith, who is currently the wide receiver 2 in his offense, but Zay Flowers is the wide receiver 1. These are all arguments I could see you making, but for me, again, I think the price is correct on Zay Flowers. I'm holding him here, and when we look at the value adjacent overall players, you see players like Justin Fields, Devon Achane, DJ Moore, Travis Etienne, Devontae Smith. I think for me, there's a couple players here that I would sell. If I could trade Devon Achane and go get Zay Flowers, that would be a move that I'm making. If I could move Etienne and go get Zay Flowers, that's probably a move that I'm making as well. I just value that wide receiver a little bit more than I value the running back. It's easier to find that plug and play at the running back position, kind of how we've seen this year with the Kyren Williams, the Raheem Mosterts, and things like that. Those are some potential moves that I'm making, but currently with Zay Flowers and his price at the wide receiver position, I think he's correctly valued at the wide receiver 13, and this is a player that I'm holding at cost. Now, moving on to my next wide receiver spotlight, we are going to be talking about Jordan Addison, wide receiver for the Minnesota Vikings. And again, this is another wide receiver who was drafted in the first round of the 2023 draft, 22 years old, 5'11", 175 pounds, and he was coming out of USC playing with Caleb Williams the previous season. Now, Addison is currently being valued as the wide receiver 16 over on Keep Trade Cut. You see, over the course of the year, we have had a little bit of a high and low kind of trend with Jordan Addison, starting with his lows that were 4,684 KTC. He reached a total high in the year at 5,757 KTC, and he's currently sitting at 5,223 KTC. So I think that spike there was most likely when Justin Jefferson was out. Jordan Addison had his wide receiver 1 overall on the week finish, and that's kind of probably when we saw the spike of Jordan Addison, and that was probably a good selling point for Jordan Addison. But as I look at where he's valued right now, again, I'm sorry, this is kind of a theme. We have gotten gotten pretty good at valuing these wide receivers in Dynasty Fantasy Football, but I promise that's the last of these spotlights that is a hold. But for me, Jordan Addison is a hold at this price. We look at the value adjacent wide receivers to him again. Zay Flowers, DJ Moore, Devontae Smith, Tank Dell, Drake London, Jaxon Smith-Njigba. These are the guys that are in his tier. And I think if you were going to say, hey, I want Jordan Addison over a Devontae Smith, they're both the wide receiver twos in their offense, but Jordan Addison had higher highs than Devontae Smith had this year. I don't know if I agree, but I will hear that argument. Now, you also have the side where you say, I want Jordan Addison over Tank Dell, better draft capital, and a guy who is going to still perform at a high level. I hear that argument as well. So for me, I think at this price, again, a hold. I don't see any real clear buys or sells at the price, but looking at the value adjacent overall players, you see guys like DJ Moore, Travis Etienne, Devontae Smith, a mid 2024 first, Tank Dell, and TJ Hawkinson. Again, these are all correctly valued in my opinion. I don't know if I want to re-roll Jordan Addison for just a new mid 24 first. Probably not something that I want to do at this point, especially because Jordan Addison showed us kind of what he's capable of at the NFL level. So I think Jordan Addison currently right now, as he sits, this is a hold for you and your Dynasty Fantasy Football teams. And keep in mind, TJ Hawkinson suffered the late ACL tear, so we're probably going to see TJ Hawkinson miss some time to start the beginning of the year next year. Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah has already talked about wanting to bring Kirk Cousins back. That means that Jordan Addison will most likely be the clear number 2 receiving target to start the year in 2024. So there is a chance for his price to increase from where it is at right now. Now, moving on to my next wide receiver, we are going to be talking about Tank Dell, wide receiver for the Houston Texans. And Tank Dell is a smaller wide receiver. He's 24 years old, 5'10", 165 pounds. And that was kind of the knock on Tank Dell earlier in the offseason. They said they didn't think the size would translate. And look at what he's done over the course of the year. Over the last 6 months, we have continued to see Tank Dell's stock rise, starting at 1,797 KTC, finishing the year at 5,182 KTC. Now, you see he's currently being valued as the wide receiver 17. To me, Tank Dell at this price, he is a sell, and I'm probably going to catch a little bit of heat for this. I'm not the biggest Tank Dell guy, and currently in the tier that he's being valued, we look at the value adjacent wide receivers, the DJ Moores, the Devontae Smiths, the Jordan Addisons, Drake Londons, Jaxon Smith-Njigbas, Michael Pittmans. I could definitely hear the argument that I want to sell Tank Dell and go get Michael Pittman Jr. and maybe something thrown in on top. I want to sell my Tank Dell and go get a DJ Moore or a Devontae Smith. I think these are moves that I would personally be making. So I guess for me, he is a sell at this price. And when we look at the value adjacent overall players, there are players like that mid 2024 first, TJ Hawkinson in this mix. I don't think either of those I really care about. Maybe if I could sell Tank Dell for that mid 24 first and potentially go get a difference maker at the quarterback position, maybe a Jayden Daniels, maybe a Brock Bowers even at the tight end position, things like that, I might consider doing that with my Tank Dell share. But we also need to take into account the Tank Dell, he had the broken fibula at the end of last year. So that is kind of that small little dip that we saw in his stock before it flattened out. And the last wide receiver that I'm going to be talking about for a player spotlight is going to be Jaxon Smith-Njigba, wide receiver for the Seattle Seahawks. And when we're looking at JSN, this is again a first round wide receiver drafted in the 2023 draft, currently being valued as the wide receiver 19 at 22 years old, almost 6 foot, 197 pounds. And this is a guy who I was very high on coming into the NFL draft. Now you see his price has certainly taken a small dip over the last 6 months. He started at 5,974 KTC and he has seen that dip and then it got a little bit slightly increased, but he's still lower than where he started. 5,153 KTC is where he sits. And we're talking about a guy who had a wrist injury to start the season. It kind of had him a little bit slower of a start. Obviously a guy that many people were excited about, even though we knew that he was going to be playing behind DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett to start the year. But as the year went on, he started to take those snaps and take those targets away from Tyler Lockett. And I think with the Seattle Seahawks moving away from Pete Carroll, I think there's a chance that they also decide to move away from long-term Tyler Lockett, especially because of the cap hit there. And they know they have Jaxon Smith-Njigba sitting in the wings, who I would argue is probably the most talented wide receiver on this roster. So when we put all of that into consideration, I think JSN is certainly a buy at his current price. We see the value adjacent receivers. It's that similar tier of guys we were talking about, Addison, Dell, London, Pittman, Higgins, and DK. I personally am going to be taking JSN over Addison. I'll take JSN over Dell. I'll take him over London, Higgins. Metcalf. I'm taking him over all these guys for the most part. So I think he is a buy for me at this price. I think the ceiling is just far too high, and I definitely still believe in the talent of Jaxon Smith-Njigba. And when we look at the value adjacent overall players, there's players like TJ Hawkinson in there, Trey McBride, and I think those are players that if you needed wide receiver talent and you wanted to go get one of those guys, you could certainly trade them to go get JSN. So with that being said, he is a buy for me at the wide receiver position. But that concludes my top 5 player spotlights, but there's certainly a lot more rookie wide receivers to talk about. I want to talk about some of the other guys in this class and see how they are currently being valued. And then we'll talk about whether I'm buying them, selling them, or holding them very quickly to close out this video. But you see right now the rookie wide receiver KTC evaluations of each of these players. Rashee Rice, he's currently being valued at the wide receiver 23. This is a guy who was pretty good down the stretch. I think he has a chance to have another good offseason and build some more rapport with Patrick Mahomes. This is a guy I'm holding at the current price. Again, Jayden Reed, we've talked about Jayden Reed, currently the wide receiver 25 on KTC. This is a player that I'm holding at this cost. I think he could potentially be the best wide receiver out there in Green Bay. And I think this guy really does remind me of, I've heard my Discord call him the Wisconsin Deebo Samuel, and I kind of like that nickname for him because I think he kind of does it all just like Deebo does. Now, at the wide receiver 33, Josh Downs, he's a buy for me. He had a really good rookie year, and Michael Pittman Jr. is a free agent this offseason who still has some things to decide. I think they extend him, but if he does leave, you could see Josh Downs' stock increase quite a bit. Dontayvion Wicks, he's getting a lot of hype this offseason. Currently the wide receiver 46. I think he's a sell right now. It's just a very crowded wide receiver room with Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, and Jayden Reed. So with that being said, I don't think there's a lot of room for Dontayvion Wicks to get some playing time. So for me, I think I'm going to sell him to somebody who believes in the hype. Wide receiver 48, Demario Douglas. Again, a guy who could end up going into 2024 as the Patriots wide receiver 1. I like Demario Douglas. He had a good year so far. He's a buy for me. Marvin Mims Jr., I'm selling him at this cost. Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, they're both under contract in 2024, and I just didn't like the year we saw out of Marvin Mims, and there's going to be some quarterback question marks in the future, so I'm selling Marvin Mims to somebody who believes. Quentin Johnston, my God, this was the biggest bust at the wide receiver position for you guys this year. He was being drafted sometimes as high as the wide receiver 2 in this class over Jordan Addison, and he just certainly has not performed to a level that we expect. The analytics don't look good, but this is a guy that you're probably holding. You invested too much into him, and you can't get enough for him in the trade room these times, so you're probably going to be holding Quentin Johnston. Michael Wilson, I'll hold him as well. This is a guy who could see some more opportunities here in 2024. Jonathan Mingo, I'm holding him. He was disappointing as well, but this is a wide receiver room that is going to lose a couple guys this offseason like Laviska Shenault and DJ Shark. So Mingo is certainly worth a hold, especially because you're not going to get much for him in the trade room. And then Jalin Hyatt, this is a guy that I'm selling if people still believe in him. I'm just not a believer in Jalin Hyatt, and I think that there's a lot more things that they have to figure out in New York before they can really focus on getting Jalin Hyatt the football. And is Jalin Hyatt really going to do enough to earn that target share that we want him to get? Probably not. So I'm selling Jalin Hyatt. Now, with all of that out of the way, that is everything that I have for you guys today. So make sure you hit that like button if you guys did enjoy the video. It is the best free way to show our channel some support, and it does let me know that you guys enjoy the content so I continue making more of it moving forward. Additionally, make sure you guys are subscribed to the channel. That way you never miss a future video, and make sure you hit that notification bell. That way you are notified when those videos do come out. And last but not least, make sure you guys go sign up for our free Discord. There is a Discord linked in the description. Like I said, it is free to join. We are in there all off season long talking Dynasty Fantasy Football 24/7, 365. And you even get a chance to be in some future videos when we do mock drafts, trade review shows, all that good stuff throughout the off season. So make sure you go join that free Discord. Like I said, it's free to join, so there's no risk in doing that. Now, I will see you guys on our next video, but until then, peace out.